Hi, everybody. Today's Monday, December 1st. I was going to say
Uh,
November.
yeah, yeah, man. You get older, boy. The years just it's gone.
Yeah, it's December 1st, and
Yeah,
2025. Welcome back, Larry. Our friend, our dear friend, our brother, Larry Johnson is here with us.
you're just saying that because I sent you money. Okay, I didn't. Thank you. A generous, kind comment from you, of course.
Please subscribe and hit like button, helping us reaching more people. And Larry, let me start with what has happened with the case of Pete Hexet and what has happened in with the bombing of the boat. And we know that two survivors, there were two survivors clutching the burning hole. And then the second missile came in and it just assassinated them.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of repercussions in the United States and in the media and with what has happened and the way that they're attacking Pete Hegseth. What is your understanding of what has happened and who's responsible for that? Because Donald Trump was asked about it, and here is what Donald Trump responded.
Can you talk a little bit about the strikes and the controversy around Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth?
I don't know anything about it. He said he did not say that, and I believe him.
So you don't know if there was
You
a
talking about the two men?
the second strike to kill the two men.
He said he didn't do it. He said he never said
Would you be okay with that if he did?
it. He said he didn't do it, so I don't have to make that decision.
Yeah, two things that he said
Yeah.
he doesn't know anything about it, and Pete Hegseth said to Donald Trump that he didn't do that.
Yeah. Donald Trump is Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes. Does that reference have anything mean anything to you? So there was a sitcom in the 1960s about American POWs in a German prisoner of war camp, but it was a comedy, okay? And the German Sergeant Schultz was his sort of he was known because he'd show up and he goes, "I know nothing, I see nothing, I hear nothing." There was Donald Trump, being Sergeant Schultz. This is an extrajudicial killing. What Donald Trump has ordered the U.S. military to do is a criminal act. It is a violation of the Geneva Convention. Uh, it is uh, it is a violation of the U.S. Constitution. And what is sickening about it is you got so many Americans who are applauding this. Yeah, go kill those drug traffickers. We don't know that they are drug traffickers. Are there some who believe they are? Sure. But we don't get to do murder based on belief. The only legitimate use of force is if the guys in those boats or gals, I'm not sure, we don't even sure what the sexes are. If they're firing at US military personnel, okay. Then you know what? If you're shooting at us, we get to shoot at you. What the United States should be doing is stopping those boats, seizing what's on board, providing the proof that this is drug trafficking. But just the dishonesty now of Donald Trump, because on the one hand, he just pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was a major drug trafficker and had actually been in prison. He's given him a pass while claiming that Maduro is involved with this drug trafficking, which candidly, uh, has he probably made some money off of it? I don't doubt that. We got a lot of U.S. politicians that make money off of it. So, um, this is just, it's a criminal act. And I have no doubt that Hegseth said that. Sounds like something exactly like the stupid kid would say. You know, he's relatively young and immature, and he thinks it's a video game. You don't. But let's not blame Trump and Hegseth alone that they're starting something new. This extrajudicial killing people because we think they're bad, That has been done by Bill Clinton. It's been done by George W. Bush. That's where it really got going, right after 9/11. So we began to justify, yeah, we think these people down in this hut are bad, so we're going to kill them. I mean, it's one of those feel good moments for, America, fuck yeah, and it's murder. And so the United States no longer has any moral standing in the world to uh, criticize or condemn what we will call human rights abuses, because that's exactly what we're doing. And it's not stopping the flow of narcotics. You want to stop the flow of narcotics, cut off the money, but we don't, because there are too many U.S. corporations and banks that are making money off of this. That's why we don't stop it.
But Larry, legally, the responsibility goes to Pete Hegseth, in my opinion, and he's, after all, responsible. I don't know if we can blame, actually, I don't think Donald Trump has a lot of information on that. He's not
No,
that
no, no,
much
no,
informed
no,
about.
no. Look, Donald Trump is the commander in chief. He is in charge, at least on paper. And Hegseth is a subordinate. So the chain of command, this is a pyramid. Donald Trump sits atop that pyramid. There's nobody above him. Harry Truman had the sign on his desk. The buck stops here. The buck stops with Trump. Trump doesn't get to pretend, oh, gee, I didn't know. Well, if you didn't know, fire Hegseth. What are your orders? And instead, Trump keeps celebrating the fact that we're killing these people. And we don't even know who we're killing. And particularly when if you've blown the boat up and there are survivors under,
It's unbelievable.
to go out and execute people who are then unarmed, not capable of fighting back. It's just, they act like this is some video game. It is a heinous crime. And it is, if you're talking about the karma building up on the United States, man, we got some bad karma coming. We can't keep, but we've been doing it over. We did it in Vietnam. We've done it in Panama, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Serbia. I mean, the list goes on, and we're facilitating murder in Ukraine. So this is just one more example that of political leadership that have lost touch with the law. They're acting outside the law. And yet, you're right, Hegseth has got a responsibility here. He should have said, no, sir, we are not going to do that. It is against the law. I mean, when he was a young officer in the Army, I guarantee you, he was never given an order allowing him to kill unarmed people who may have needed medical attention. No, execute him. So maybe we were learning from the Israelis, or we're behaving like the Israelis, the Zionists. But this is wrong.
How do you see because there are people in the United States arguing that those lower rank, officials who are receiving the orders from Hegseth, they can just reject the order and don't do that. How do you see that? Is that possible to happen?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's part of when they take an oath in the military, there's always the understanding that you can disobey an illegal order. And what constitutes an illegal order? If I say, Nima, I want you to go kill that mother and children. I think they're bad. She said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to participate in that. But this should go all up and down the chain of command. And inevitably what happens, what makes, the U.S. military today such a disgraceful institution, is they usually punish the lower level people and the officers above skate free. You notice that, but this isn't a new phenomenon. Go back to the lie that was told to get us into the war in Iraq in 2003. To my knowledge, not a single senior officer in the chain of command. And so you start with the commander of CENTCOM and the deputy commander of CENTCOM, Central Command. No, they didn't speak up at all. They went along with it. People and the chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You know what they could do, what they should have done, is said, no, I can't do this. I'm resigning my commission, which means, oh my God, it's gonna cut into your retirement benefits. You're not gonna make as much money as you thought. And they go, well, God, if it means losing money, now I keep making the money. I just shut my eyes and pretend I don't see this. It's happened over and over and over. You know, I spent 23 years working with JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. And, after 9/11, they got, the drone tracking people with drones and killing people with drones became a thing. And, I counted at one point, I think we'd killed over 40,000 people and accomplished what? Feel good? So that we could, hey, here are these people on the ground. And so we can drop a bomb on them, wipe them out. No more terrorism. And then, then what we find out years later, we're funding and arming some of those terrorists. We're buddies with them. We're using them for our own political purposes. We're not against terrorism, only if they're attacking us. But man, if we can line up with Al Qaeda or line up with ISIS and use them for our own purposes, hey, great. The United States did that with respect to the Second Chechen War, helped finance it and helped to provide fighters that were attacking and killing Russian citizens, because we had this broader, this so-called higher purpose.
Larry, the Intercept reported on leaked documents, Pentagon documents, in which it shows that Trump plans to harass Venezuela and Caribbean until 2028, and they're planning to stay there. And
you mean that they're planning to keep the naval force off the coast?
Yeah, seems
that's a costly proposition. I don't think that's going to happen. They're going to run out of steam at some point. You can't keep troops deployed like that. It's like if I tell you to grab hold of a bar and hang from it, yeah, you might be able to do that for a minute, but after a minute or so, the muscles and everything, you can't do that forever. That's sort of equivalent to when you deploy this kind of force. It's got lots of moving parts, and when they basically it's like pulling. If you have a bow and an arrow and you pull it back, you can't just keep that indefinite. At some point, you got to let go of the arrow, or you got to release the tension on the bowstring. And so they're not going to be able to keep this up. And I think actually Maduro's in a pretty strong position, because if the United States strikes militarily, they've got a lot that they can do in return. They've got missiles that can be fired that will put some of our ships at risk. They might even sink one or two. We better not ever put anybody on ashore, because American bodies will start piling up. You'll have enough Venezuelans willing to take a shot at us that we'll be in a Vietnam quagmire, only worse. So this is Trump has such a juvenile view of military power. I mean, it really is. It's very simplistic, and it's unfortunate. He should have stuck with his prime, his main sort of belief, at least in the campaign, was that we shouldn't be involved with needless foreign wars. Let's stay at home. Let's build America. Let's make America first. No, we're going to go out and bully Venezuela. Just he apparently, when he was growing up, his mother never taught him, keep your damn hands to yourself. Stop meddling in the affairs of other people, other countries. Clean up your own act, set an example at home. Instead, boy, we're going to get ourselves embroiled in something that's going to be pretty messy.
How much of what's going on in with the case of Venezuela is related to the policies in CIA? Because General Flynn, I don't know if you saw his podcast with Steve Bannon. He said that it's time to to just
burn the
destroy,
CIA,
yeah,
burn the CIA to the ground. Yeah.
I don't know if we're, but yeah, it's time.
I mean,
to
that's what he said. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
just
exactly. But
quoting him. No, I agree with him. The problem with the CIA, as it was originally conceived by Truman, or what he thought he was signing off on, is okay. We're going to have a group of case officers. The conventional public calls them agents, but they're not agents. A CIA agent is a foreigner, someone from another country who's paid by the United States to betray their own country and give us secrets. But the CIA was conceived as, okay, we're going to go out and recruit people from countries where we need to have like we want to have information at the time about the Soviet Union, and we want to have information about China. So we need to get people who are on the inside that can tell us exactly what's going on. And then they'll write up that information and provide it to what's called a reports officer, and they'll release it as human intelligence. So you got, as a number and categorized, etc. And then the analysts would take that, as well as take information from public sources, and tell the president what the hell's going on. Well, that's how it was supposed to be. But then they discovered, geez, we got all these guys, a lot of them are former military in the early days of the CIA, coming out of Office of Strategic Services. And all of a sudden we began deciding, hey, we can change the outcome of elections. We can overthrow, we can line up, we can train guerrilla forces, insurgent groups. And that has a corrupting influence on the analysis. And, I saw this firsthand, 40 years ago during the Contra War. So the supporting the Contras to fight the Sandinistas, because it was couched as we're fighting these communists who are under the control of the Soviets, who are trying to take over the world. Now, it was complete nonsense, but at the time I was sort of saying, yeah, we got, that's how we need to look at it. And the project was run out of what was called the Central American Task Force. And they had basically a war room over there where they were issuing orders and designing military missions. They mined the harbors of Managua with mines to prevent ships from going in. And what happened was the pressure develops that you've got to tell a good story. This is a project the president has commissioned. They want to see it succeed. So you don't want anybody coming in and saying anything negative about it. And I recall there were a couple of analysts from the Nicaragua branch. They actually went down, they were on the analytical side. They went down to Honduras, and they actually were accosted by some angry case officers who were saying, hey, why don't you tell them, we're putting out these reports and you're ignoring them, because they were saying that there were actually problems with the Contras. Well, what was happening is back at headquarters in the Central American Task Force. The guy running it was a fellow named Alan Fires. They were shutting down those reports. They weren't allowing them to go forward. And you were seeing there was pressure brought on us as analysts to not say anything critical about the Contras, even if it was true. In fact, I remember there was one, I was at a meeting, they called it a warning meeting with the National Intelligence Officer for Latin America, Bob Vickers. And so I'm doing my brief, and I said, and the Contras, and he goes, stop right there. I go, what? He says, you can't call them the Contras. You must call them the Democratic National Resistance. And I went, but Reagan calls them the Contras. And he goes, yeah, but he's the president. Okay. And so, Neiman, this is what we're talking about, how this intelligence process is so politicized, so corrupted. Yeah, I agree with Mike Flynn. Burn it to the ground, start over. But do not, in fact, I would say the one thing we do not need, or it needs to be used very, very, very sparingly, is a covert action capability. Instead, what's happened is the covert action has taken over the agency. It becomes that's sexy. That's where you get promoted. That's where you get to do all these, crazy things. And when you look, if we go back and say, let's actually total up how many people we've killed through the CIA and what have we achieved? Is the world a better place now? Is it more at peace? Or have we created a lot of human suffering? We created a lot of human suffering, in my view.
Larry, when you live in Latin America, for example, in Brazil, all these countries, Argentina, looking at what Donald Trump is doing in Latin America, with the case of Venezuela, they're doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, you mentioned Honduras. We know the situation with Cuba, Colombia, Argentina. They have bribed, people into, in favor of the president of Argentina. And it's all about, when you look at it, the government, Donald Trump came to power, he was talking about Soros, these regime change, USAID, let's go after them, remove them. And
yeah, and
after all, you see, look at the policies, it's totally the same as George Soros. And he's doing everything to.
Yeah. Well, who does Trump appoint as Secretary of Treasury? Scott Bessent, who's basically a Soros lackey, or has been. So yeah, it's a complete disconnect. When the Soviet Union was intact, the one of the primary missions for CIA officers who worked in Latin America was not worrying so much about the internal politics going on there. It was to identify Soviets, diplomats that we could recruit in hopes that we would get a spy that would then go back to Moscow and give us all the inside information. Excuse me, I'm getting ready to sneeze. Sorry. Now with that there's no more Soviet Union, that priority for quote recruiting Soviets has disappeared. It may be that they're saying let's focus on China. That's a possibility. But
no, not China, communist China.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, communist China that's kicking U.S. rear end in all areas, economic and in terms of industrial production, etc. Yeah, those guys. So the U.S. has a long history of meddling, and in Central South America. I do know, it's widely believed that the United States was behind the coup that ousted Salvador Allende and brought General Pinochet to power in Chile. It is absolutely true that the United States wanted to get rid of Allende. But, an old friend of mine, I think he's deceased now, he was a young case officer at the embassy there at the time. And he said what happened was while the U.S. tried to influence it and tried to get involved, the Chilean military said, stay out, mind your own business, stay in the embassy, because they were taking care of it. I think they didn't want to be beholden to the United States in any way. They were sort of, like the old commercial, "Mother, please, I'd rather do it myself." Well, that's what they did. They did it themselves. But you can't deny U.S. facilitation of a variety of authoritarian regimes. And as long as we said we were fighting communism, we could do whatever. Well, now get rid
Larry,
of
there is no communism. There
now.
is no.
Now there's narco terrorism. That's what we're fighting. Narco terrorism. Man, we got to use all the violence in the world to stop these narco terrorists. Except the guy that's in prison, we're going to let him out. You get a pass, pat on the ass. Good guy, thumbs up. You can't make this stuff up.
Larry, shifting the gear to Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, he's asking the president of Israel to be pardoned. And
There's a
yes,
there's a he I think it's a Yiddish word, chutzpah, or as Michelle Bachmann, a former member of Congress, she called it chutzpah. It's chutzpah. Okay.
and the response from the president of Israel is that he has to retire from politics, early elections in Israel, halting judicial reform legislation, and establishing a state inquiry into October the 7th. Do you think that Netanyahu would do these lines, would somehow cooperate with them instead of getting being pardoned by the president of Israel? And what is your take on the situation with the case of Netanyahu, and how important is he?
No, well, he's not that important, because if he goes away, the policy towards the Palestinians is not going to change. These Zionists have no desire whatsoever to have a Palestinian state, and they want to exterminate them. This land is their land, don't you know? Because God said so. I mean, it's just So the when Juan Perón was president of Argentina, he was known. His slogan was sort of "Pan y circo," bread and circus. Keep the people fed, keep them entertained, and you can do whatever you want. So that's, Bibi is part of the circus. The U.S. is part of the bread. As long as the U.S. keeps funneling money to them, Bibi can 1 minute be a great guy, next minute a bad guy, and then they get rid of him. And where are we? We're still killing Palestinians, still starving them. So the one thing that will potentially change this is, as the political polls, what they're showing is a growing number of Americans are just sick to death of being under the thumb of these Zionists, and are pushing back. And Trump can read polls, and once he realizes that, he's basically embracing a corpse, and it's not going to look good for him come midterm elections. He may change policy. There's always that possibility, but the Zionist lobby is still very, very strong in U.S. Political circles.
But Israel is somehow cracking from within, Larry. I don't know if you saw the footages of the people, thousands lining up at a Portuguese embassy. They want they were asking for citizenship appointments. Why do they need to leave Israel if Israel is doing great right now?
Well, yeah,
These people are not happy with the situation in Israel. That shows how the economy is working, how the society is working. And Netanyahu, every time that he comes out, says this is the only state of Jewish people, and they can come here and live a prosperous life. That's not the case anymore.
Well, yeah, the the economy is in tatters, um, and they are really totally dependent upon the largesse of the United States sending them money. Um, so, but the problem is, I suspect many of those who are leaving are the ones who would be considered moderates, are the ones who would advocate policies against Netanyahu, and once they leave, it further solidifies the crazed policies of the settlers. So, but you know, Israel is bleeding people. They're not attracting more. They are diminishing. So, uh, for right now, they appear to be intact. But you know, over the midterm, the very survival of Israel could be come into question.
Don't you think that Netanyahu, the way that he has the connection, he has some sort of leverage on the politicians in the United States, if he's removed from power in Israel, that would somehow influence the support that Israel is getting from the United States? Or because Naftali Bennett is not that much popular, in my opinion, among the politicians in the United States, as Netanyahu is. And now Netanyahu is so powerful. He's somehow smart how to play, how to manipulate the whole system in the United
Yeah.
States.
No. Actually, I don't think it's not a personality thing. I mean, yeah, Netanyahu's well known among the U.S. politicians, but there's this deeper belief about, and it comes out of Christian Zionism, that they keep citing that those the passage from Genesis, that those who bless you will be blessed and those who curse you will be cursed, and that's why we have to support Israel. There is um, there's an interesting podcast. Um, Brent Tucker is a retired Delta Force operator, and I've met Brent. He lives over in Orlando, and he had this guy Dan Blazarian. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah, I
Blazarian.
know.
Blazarian is really, anti-Zionist, strongly anti-Zionist. Now, they had a cordial debate over this, but Brett kept saying, I am a diehard supporter of Israel because it's in the Bible. And because God says, we need to support Israel. And Blazarian makes the point, he says, hey, those promises were to Abraham. And if you recall, Abraham had two sons, and he had both.
Ishmael.
It's not just Jews; it's Muslims as well.
Mm.
Okay, so, but like I said, I use Brent as an illustration of he's a smart guy, and he's been out and around, but he is just in the pocket of the Zionist mentality, and that has nothing to do with Netanyahu. It goes to this broader belief that these are God's chosen people and that our obligation is to uphold them. Now, Blazarian made an interesting argument. He says, what's crazy is it says within the Talmud, it speaks disparagingly of Jesus and of his mother Mary, that some very insulting, vile passages with reference to them. He says, in contrast, in Islam, they recognize Jesus as one of the key prophets, and his mother is venerated. So he said, so why are we backing the guys that hate the Christians instead of working with the guys who actually recognize Jesus and Mary as godly people? It's an interesting question. But see, that's where, once we're off into this whole religion area, rational logic thought out the window. It's all, we got to do it because, God says so. And we saw, Tucker Carlson pulled the scab off of that ugly wound when he interviewed Ted Cruz. And you saw, Cruz made it very clear. He didn't even know what he was talking about. Cruz is not a dummy. but it's just this religious belief that infests. If it's all built on a lie. We've been taught to believe. If you're when I say we, I refer to the Christian community. That those who are Zionists have been taught to believe that the Old Testament is this holy book, and in that God has laid out the plan, and that plan is to favor Israel. And they ignore the fact, when I'm saying the current Christians ignore the fact that when you get into the original 12 tribes of Israel, well, 10 of them are gone. They got assimilated, or you could actually make the case that the Palestinians of today are the descendants of those people. So they should be covered by the blessings of Abraham as well, but are not. And then this just absurd notion that these are a special people that, we say that this is the God of love. This is the eternal creator. But he only likes this one particular group of people really well, and therefore gives them permission to go kill whoever. And so once you accept that fantasy and that myth as reality, and then you begin to act on it, we get what we see right now in a genocide in Palestine.
Mhm. Larry, the dark side of what has happened in Syria was the government who came in power, Al-Jolani, HTS, and these people who are in power in Syria. But on the other hand, we see that Turkey is feeling the threat of Israel, and they're getting closer to Iran. And they had a meeting, Israel, not just Turkey, Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They're getting closer. And it seems that the first time I've heard that the Turkish foreign minister said in Tehran, he said that the greatest threat to the Middle East is Israel. You haven't heard that before from Turkish, official before what has happened in Syria. The Syria thing that has changed everything. How do you see the situation in the Middle East? Because after all, if you're sitting in Washington looking at what's going on in the Middle East, you see that everything is changing against Israel. It's not in favor of Israel.
Well, yeah, Israel's becoming more isolated diplomatically, but Erdogan, he's a gas bag, bunch of hot air. Oh, Israel's they're the biggest threat. Hey, keep sending the oil to them. So big threat,
True.
yeah, but he's making money off of them. So hey, he can live with that. So Turkey's the one entity that probably could decisively turn the situation with respect to the Palestinians around, and that is cut off all oil going to Israel, cripple their economy. And, candidly, China, Russia, India also have that potential power. That they don't use it. And, I criticize them for that. So this, it's an unstable situation. The vision that was presented, oh my God, now 25 years ago, by the likes of Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl, they're all touting that all we got to do is, if we get rid of Saddam Hussein and democracy will flourish, and as long as we got these other democratic states, Israel will be okay. Well, that's not how it's turning out. And we've seen actually recently with the visit of Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia to visit with Trump. MBS is he's not lining up to sign on to the Abraham Accord, and have made it very, very clear that there's not going to be any movement with respect to recognizing Israel until Israel comes in and acknowledges and accepts a two-state solution, accepts a Palestinian state, which Israel's not going to do. So it's only going to be through, I think, some military or economic disaster that Israel ultimately will be compelled or will be unable to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, it seems they're repeating the same scenario here in Latin America with Venezuela.
Yeah.
It was Iraq, right now Venezuela. And everybody should understand that we're going to see the same sort of issues here in Latin America if something happens with Venezuela. It's just going to
Well,
huge chaos.
you've got to say, if they try to force Maduro from office and he leaves and a U.S. backed government comes into being, I think you'll see a campaign of attack. We'll call it terrorism, but it'll be Venezuelans who are resisting U.S. interference will start attacking that existing government. It'll be an unstable mess, and it could even lead to attacks on the oil fields, then blowing them up if the United States is hoping to get control of that. So the ability of these to move through the jungles of Venezuela, and you come across the border there with Colombia or with Brazil, those are very remote locations, and it's not easy to control what takes place there. So this is a recipe for chaos, in my view.
Larry, how fast Russia is advancing in Ukraine?
Pretty fast. I just posted a video last night of Sonar 21. It shows that since September, Russia has captured 86 settlements, towns, villages. They're moving very fast now compared to previous years. And again, I provide all the list of different generals retired who have made all these crazy claims about how Russia's stalled, how it's a stalemate, Russia's not moving, Russia's incompetent. No, they're moving quite rapidly now, and the major holdup prior to this, down at the bottom. Keep going down to the bottom of that article. It's a very short video. Yeah, right there. It'll show you. So it shows you right there. You see the different territory that's being taken. What the very last scene is just the one that really tells the story. There's Pokrovsk, Mirnograd. And I think this is Kramatorsk. And now watch this movement. Yeah, so 86. So Russia's now moving much more rapidly, and they've done a couple of up to this point. Russia has sort of limited. Again, this is why it's called a special military operation and not war. If it was a war, they would have shut down all the ports in the Black Sea, and sunk any ship going in and out of those ports. Would have been unnoticed because it's a war, but it's not a war. It's a special military operation. And so as such, Russia has continued to allow some, let's call it normal maritime traffic in and out of Ukrainian ports. In light of this recent attack on two oil tankers that are reportedly hauling oil out of Russia, this attack was carried out by the Ukrainians with British support. At least that's what Russia's claiming. We could see Russia now saying, "Okay, we're going to shut down those ports." Russia's already close enough that they control some a couple of locations on the east bank of the Dnieper River that they can shut down, choke off any barges and ships coming down that river headed to the Black Sea. And 60% of Ukraine's economy is dependent upon movement up and down that river. So, we'll see what if Russia is now going to expand this almost to a war footing. But they're capturing territory and taking control of territory at a very rapid pace, and Ukraine doesn't have the manpower to stop it.
Don't you think part of this decision not to attack everything on the supply line of Ukrainian army, because they had made some sort of strategic decision in order to let them providing them with weapons, because they want the Ukrainian army to get closer to the Russian army instead of Russian army advancing. The goal, yeah, go
Go ahead.
The goal, in my opinion, is not the land; it's just destroying the army.
Yeah, no. Well, the attrition, the demilitarization aspect was correct. The Russians would allow the Ukrainians to come to them and chew them up. But also prior to January of 2025, Russia was still in the process of building up its ground forces. So, you go back to February of 2022, the actual ground forces that Russia had may have been around 400,000 to cover, the whole country. And they only used, anywhere between 125 and 180,000 in that initial surrounding of Kiev and other places. And it was only by September of 2022 that the Russians realized, okay, we're going to have to now turn this into more of a military operation. That's when they started mobilizing, the first mobilization. But when you mobilize people, you don't just, put a uniform on them and toss them to the front. They need to go through training. And so if I mobilize you in September, and you have to go through 6 months of training, so just do the math. You go September, October, November, December, January, February. So you're not hitting the main line until March. And then, so, keep people that are mobilized in October and that are mobilized in November and mobilized in December. The ones in December don't come online until July or August. So gradually you're building that force up. And I maintain that's one of the reasons early on you saw Russia doing limited operations. The attack on Mariupol, which was a critical target for the Russians, they captured it in May of 2022, wasn't followed immediately by conquering other areas. Again, limited manpower. It was in 2023 that the Battle of Bakhmut was fought. There were other, smaller engagements, but that was the main focus. Then in 2024, it was Avdiivka. But now you get into 2025, like just in the last 3 months, they steamrolled their way through 86 settlements and villages and towns. Some small, some large, and you got Seversk still on the menu, and Liman on the menu. The odds are high that Russia could be, have complete control of the Donetsk and have kicked out all Ukrainians by the end of December. That's sort of an optimistic timeline, but more probably they would have it all secured by March. Ukraine doesn't have any good options here, and yet this is so reminiscent of how, if you go back and look at the mentality of Germans at the end of World War II, the German leadership, they were engaged with a lot of delusional thinking, and they were still able to inflict a lot of damage on the Soviets, but it didn't change the outcome of the war. They were still that they were going to lose. Uh, it was just a matter of how they were going to lose. And so, Ukraine right now, it's in great turmoil with as the corruption scandal looms over it, and it's militarily incapable of, pushing the Russians back. And yet, you got so many in the West who are financially committed to this.
But they're doing terrorist acts right now. They're
Yeah.
doing everything. I don't know how Russia would be able to control that. That is difficult to be controlled.
Well, no, it's difficult, but actually, Russia's done it before. Remember, the Chechen War was a combination of terrorism and attacks on military targets. It took the Russians 10 years to get it under control, but they did it. And there's a great. I just saw a video last night of Putin's visit to Chechnya, and because that's a Muslim republic
Yeah.
in Russia, and just it was you see how the healing has taken place. 20 years since that war ended, or I guess 2010, so 15 years. But Russia's been there and done that. They know how to work, if you will, the counterterrorism angle, and they recognize, they could be fighting a guerrilla war, and there could be an insurgent war. They've done it. The advantage they have with respect to Ukraine is, there could be some Ukrainian partisans, let's call it that, but Russia's not having to learn how to speak Urdu or Pashtun or Arabic. It's Russian speaking Russian or Ukrainian. The same culture. So, it's one of those things that Russia may face, and I think they've had the experience of dealing with it before.
Who's training the Ukrainian army? The new troops coming to the Ukraine are those people who were kidnapped from the streets in Kiev or mostly in the eastern part of Ukraine. Who is training them? Is the training mostly done in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine, maybe in Poland, Romania, and those centers?
Well, there's not a lot of training. That's point number one. Point number two, the whatever training takes place inside Ukraine is highly risky. So it's more likely that they are being taken out of the country to Poland, Romania, principally. Previously they were going to places like France, but I think, just from a logistics element, they'll try to confine it, closer to Ukraine. But I don't think that, this is one of the problems that the Ukrainian army faces. They don't have the luxury of time to send people for basic training, which is usually like a 3-month experience, then followed by what's called advanced individual training. And you say, well, what's that? Well, that's where, if you're a radio operator, you learn how to operate a radio. Or if you're a drone operator, you learn how to operate drones. Or if you're involved with tanks, you learn how to drive and shoot a tank. So there's, those are not just natural talents that come to people easily. They have to get training. And if they do it in Ukraine, the Russians with their missiles can hit any training site, and they have. So that I think whatever training is being done largely outside of Ukraine.
And by the mercenaries or in Ukraine? Those training in Ukraine are by the mercenaries, or the Ukrainian army they have the capabilities of fighting and training the new troops?
No, actually, it's NATO. NATO's been providing a lot of the training, or NATO countries. Now, there have been some interesting articles from Ukrainians just complaining about the fact that they're getting trained by people that really have not been involved in any kind of successful combat, and are drawing on lessons learned in, say, Afghanistan or Iraq. which are completely irrelevant to what's going on in Ukraine. You know, or it's sort of like, you want to play soccer, and you want to get trained to be a championship team. So the trainer you bring in is the guy that's lost the most games ever in the history of soccer. That that doesn't make sense. But that's sort of what is happening, where NATO is pretending that we've got the superior skill, superior experience. We're going to tell you how it's done, and frankly, the Ukrainian, it should be the other way. The ones who should be doing the training right now are the Ukrainians training NATO, and saying, if you think you're going to go fight the Russians, think again. Let's tell you what we've encountered.
Yeah. In terms of weapons, Larry, today Ukraine, let's assume last year, this day, how do you compare last year and today, in terms of the weapons they possess today to fight Russia?
Oh, it's diminished. The West still has not been able to turn on an industrial output to replace losses, whether we're talking artillery, armored personnel, tanks, armored personnel carriers, Patriot missile batteries. I heard a report, I don't know if it's true, that supposedly Lockheed Martin now has doubled its production of Patriot missiles. Oh, good. Instead of 500 a year, they're doing 7,000. But it's still, it doesn't solve the problem they face when those missiles are used in combat, because just to take down one incoming missile, you need a minimum of 2 Patriots, minimum, maybe 4. So with the volume of fire that Russia has unleashed on Ukraine, if the West was in a position to actually provide those Patriot missiles, Ukraine's going to burn through them in a heartbeat. So yeah, the West is completely unprepared industrially and economically to sustain a war. And
Welcome, Paul.
there's Mr. Roberts.
How's it
Hello,
going,
Larry.
Paul?
Hi there.
Hello, Nima.
So nice to see you, Paul.
Well, thank you.
Paul, joining the talk, we are talking about the conflict in Ukraine. How do you see Steve Witkoff tomorrow going to meet with Vladimir Putin? And what are the terms in your opinion? Because we had the meeting in Geneva, then the meeting between Rubio together with Witkoff and Kushner, and the new head of negotiators in Ukraine is Umarov. What is the communication between Washington, and what is the message that tomorrow Steve Witkoff gonna give to Putin, and how optimistic are you if we can achieve something?
Well, Nima, I have no idea. I think diplomats just like to go to meetings. That's what I think. Larry may have a much better idea than I do. You see, I don't understand the point of any of these meetings, because Putin, or rather the Russian troops, are on the verge of a complete and total victory. They seem, if anything, to be held back by the Kremlin. And so when he's on the verge of settling it on his terms, I don't understand the interest in these meetings, or negotiating some kind of an agreement. It just makes no real sense to me. I just see it as a display of lack of confidence, lack of resolution. It's almost like Putin's afraid to win the war. But I don't know how well informed that opinion of mine is. It's probably not very well informed. But that's the impression I get, that he just doesn't want to win a war.
Well, actually, I think there's another element at play. And I've heard this directly from several Russians. the Ukrainians are relatives. In fact, the number of Russians who are married to Ukrainians and Ukrainians married to Russians, it's not like they're some foreign people. And so, actually, I think from Putin's standpoint, they really do want to minimize. This isn't about destroying the Ukrainians. It's about trying to, because they're not fighting Ukraine, they're fighting NATO. It is a proxy war, and the Ukrainians have been used as cannon fodder in this process. And in fact, the nature of this relationship, the General Syrskyi, the Ukrainian military commander, his parents live in Russia. They're drawing Russia Social Security, Russian health care. So it's not so much that that Putin's not trying to win. It is that their goals are clear. They want to demilitarize, denazify. And the demilitarize means they want to reduce the Ukrainian military down to below 100,000 soldiers and get rid of NATO, that it's out. They recognize that doing that, the ideal way to do that is through negotiation, because they're going to have to negotiate with the West, but they're going to negotiate from a position of strength. And so to the extent that the United States will finally recognize that, and that's been the problem, the U.S. refuses to listen to what the Russians are saying, that what their demands are. And Putin has reiterated, he says, look, if we don't get it diplomatically, we're going to get it on the battlefield. But the other element that has prevented the bigger push by Russia from a military standpoint is it's only within the last 6 to 7 months that they finally got their ground forces up to strength of over 750,000, because they're fighting all along this 1,000-mile line of contact. And previously they just did not have the manpower to be able to fight on different fronts. Just before you came on, we looked at a video that I posted at Sonar 21 that shows the advances of Russia in the last 3 months. That's September. They've, in the past, you've had so many of these retired U.S. generals saying, "Oh, Russia's a bunch of bums, or they're stuck, they can't beat the Ukrainians." And well, they've taken 86 villages and settlements, and when you look at it on the map, we're now seeing significant movement to the west. So I think that's one of the other things that's at play here. Putin would like to get the negotiated settlement if he could, but Russia's not going to move away from its fundamental demand, which is the demilitarize and then denazify, which means new elections in Ukraine and no Nazis allowed, period.
Yeah, I'm aware of all of that explanation, and I think there's a lot of truth in it. On the other hand, I think if he's concerned about the Ukrainians, the way he's fought this war is maximize casualties on both sides. It's maximized Russian casualties, it's maximized Ukrainian casualties. He could have shut the whole country down electronically 4 years ago, and the war would have been immediately over. But he seems fearful of appearing to be a very decisive force. And of course, you're right, and I totally agree that Russia's really not at war with Ukraine. It's at war with sort of a pseudo-Nazi remnants installed in office by the Americans to conduct war originally against the Russian population within Ukraine, which eventually forced Putin's intervention. Well, he has to be able to defeat those people throughout Ukraine. And I think after all of this time, the Russians should have learned that they don't get any successful negotiations. Larry, we both watched and discussed the efforts of Putin and Lavrov during December of 2021 through February of 2022, trying to get a mutual security agreement with the West. They got cold shouldered by the Biden regime, by EU, by NATO. Every kind of agreement they've ever had has been broken. We have the Minsk agreement, which was used to deceive Putin and the Russians. I don't understand why he has any confidence in the negotiations. And we've seen again, at least the original 28 points that Trump put out required Europe coming to terms with Russia, or having a security agreement. And Europe won't even accept any loss of Ukrainian territory. They won't even accept the loss of Donbass. So as long as you have these elements that are hostile, and I don't see why Putin thinks he's going to achieve anything. He could very easily achieve a victory and then dictate the terms. It's like you said, Larry, the West is not prepared for a war with Russia. They couldn't possibly go to war with Russia. And so there's no reason for him not to win a war and tell everyone what the terms are. Who can do anything about it? Nobody can do anything about it. And it's this lack of resolution. He's let a war go on 4 years. The West got more and more involved, more involved, more involved. The provocations got worse and worse. Sooner or later, that type of situation spins out of control. And I think Putin has had plenty of evidence that he's not getting anywhere with his negotiations.
Well, I think the other element for the negotiation side is that Russia's under some pressure from countries like China, India, South Africa, even Brazil, and other of the global South to be seen as making a good faith effort on the negotiation front. And so part of it is Russia's been sensitive to not being perceived as wanting only a military solution and eschewing a diplomatic solution. If you recall, I think it was 2023 when there was an African delegation that came to Moscow, and that's when Putin, they were pushing for a negotiated settlement, encouraging Putin, negotiate. And Putin said, "Hey guys, here's the agreement." He pulled out and had them look at it. This is what we had tentatively agreed to with the Ukrainians in March of 2022, and it was. He said, and the document we're working from, that was brought to the table by the Ukrainians, so we were willing to negotiate then. And he said, and at that time, our position was that Ukraine could retain the Donbass. They just simply had to provide the guarantees and assurances for protecting the Russian speakers and the church. Well, the United States with the Brits blew that up real quick. And this is where I think it's important for the West to understand the meaning of the term special military operation. Russia's only had one mobilization, where they mobilized 320,000 reservists in September of 2022. Well, they've got a potential reserve force, according, if you look at the CIA fact book, they claim it's like 2 to 3 million. Stanislav Kropivnik, former, who served in the U.S. Army as a major, he says actually the number's closer to 10 million. Well, if Russia was on a war footing, they'd mobilize 10 million people. They would have the manpower then to actually sweep the entire battlefield. But if they haven't done that, in fact, if you go to Moscow or go to St. Petersburg, or even I've been to some of the outlying community, you wouldn't know there's a war going on because it's being fought at a low level. And from the Russian perspective, they've suffered very few casualties compared to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians keep putting out that, the Russians are suffering massive losses. there's simply no evidence of that. But there is ample evidence with the growth of the cemeteries in Ukraine that they are suffering, 8 to 10 times as many casualties.
Larry, I agree that Putin has emphasized negotiation. It goes way back past 2022. It goes back to 2014.
Yeah.
That's when he was trying to get them to abide by the Minsk agreement. He held on that for 8 years while we built a big army for Ukraine. Certainly, and every week he and Lavrov express again how willing they are to negotiate. So at some point, he's certainly met the requirement of showing his willingness. And so if India and China and Brazil are putting pressure, he should just ignore it. He has to deal to Russia's interests, not theirs. If the Russian liberals, the Atlanticists, integrationists, the people who want to be incorporated in the West, and this was one of the declared points of Trump's 28 points, was to bring Russia back into the West. Well, that's the end of BRICS. BRICS was created as a defensive mechanism from being excluded from the West and the sanctions. So if the Russians are simply going to have a negotiation and they end up back in the West, well, that's BRICS gone. The function for it is gone. So I know all these arguments, and it's not that they're really untrue, but I think many of them miss the point that, in fact, you yourself show he hasn't mobilized. He wasn't prepared to go in February of 2022. They were having to rely on Prigozhin and the semi-official military, and he didn't call up troops. He didn't get prepared. He never has been prepared. I call him Putin the unready.
Well,
He's
remember,
never prepared. He is never prepared.
Well, remember, Paul, that
This
the
has
initial
gone on too long, 4 years, over a small area like that.
Yeah, I mean, remember
It's not real. It's not real, Larry. It's almost like he is playing some game. I've always said, well, okay, what he's doing is using the war to try to get a mutual security agreement. And I can understand it in that way. I think what he really wants is not an end to the conflict in Ukraine. He wants an end to the conflict with the West. He wants a mutual security agreement that was denied him so many times. And that's what he wants. And I think that's why he's kept the war going, hoping that a way of ending it is to get a general reconciliation so that eventually NATO can come off of Russia's border. I mean, I think for Putin, it's a long-term security problem. They don't want NATO on the border with American missile bases in Poland and Romania and wherever. And I don't know if that's the correct way to understand it, but it's the way I understand it to make sense of this never-ending war, where more and more people get killed, and he shows less and less resolution. But who knows how it's going to come out? I don't know. I hope it comes out nice.
Yeah. Well, remember what, they went in with only 125,000 troops in February of 2022.
He was not ready.
No. Because their objective with that was they went in with enough to put pressure on Ukraine to negotiate. And that's exactly what happened. Ukraine came to the negotiating table and they had an agreement.
Yeah.
They had an agreement. And in fact, as part of that agreement, to show good faith, Putin ordered the withdrawal of the Soviet tanks that were then parked outside of Kiev to the north. And it was then that Boris Johnson, in collaboration with Joe Biden and Lloyd Austin, came in and told Zelensky, no, absolutely, no. And so then that canceled that agreement. So they then shifted. And if you recall, in May of 2022, Russia, their first move was to get control of Mariupol, because Mariupol at that time was the last remaining city under Ukrainian control that was down on the Sea of Azov. And Russia defeated them there. And then they said, okay, now we got to build up. But again, their goal was to demilitarize not just Ukraine, but NATO. And that's what's been happening. I mean, what they've exposed is NATO has thrown every single weapon system that it has available, short of nuclear weapons and the Tomahawk cruise missiles, into this battle, and they've been inconsequential. And this from the Russian standpoint, they're not on a clock. Many in the West think that they've taken too long. The Russians don't see that. I mean, I've met with probably 30 different people in the last month, the last 5 weeks.
Some of them see it.
A few do, but
Yeah,
most aren't. If anything, there'd be pressure to be more violent. And what Putin's trying to avoid is actually getting into a shooting war with the West. They could win it.
Oh, I don't. You've already shown that there's no way the West can get into a shooting war with Russia.
Well, no, I agree. I agree with you.
I don't think Putin's. I don't think he's worried about. If he's worried about that, he's silly.
Well, did you see the plan that Germany it got leaked documents? They're talking about getting a 800,000 man army to attack Russia. They're going to war with Russia. I mean, this is the German generals are being asked.
No, I know all about that. All of that talk, Larry, all that talk in Europe about war with Russia is because the EU's falling apart, and they have to have something to hold it together, and it's the Russian enemy. So they're trying to use the Russian threat to hold the EU together.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them think they would have a chance. That 800,000 German army would be gone almost instantly.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
And there's no possibility of Europe going to war with Russia. They would be annihilated, and unless Putin takes the same tactic. It's okay. We'll have a 20-year war. We'll advance a few meters every day, and he could do that again, but if I don't think he would be allowed. I think the military have had enough of this. A lot of the Russian talk shows, people are tired of this. I've seen comments, even on my articles, Russians, and so we're tired of this, and they are having trouble. The Russian energy facilities have been hit. There have been periods even in St. Petersburg where they can't complete business transactions because the internet's down, the GPS system's down. There have been gasoline lines.
Now
It has had an impact.
Look, I've been in Moscow twice in the last 5 weeks. It's just not true. This gas line business, that's a bunch of Western propaganda.
For what reason?
Well, because they're trying to convince the West, hey, Ukraine still has a shot. Ukraine is not losing. They can still win. They can still win. I mean, the lies on this side are expansive. Listen, I'm sorry, I gotta go.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you. I appreciate the opportunity, and
yeah, great. Yeah.
Well, maybe Anima can have us both on at the same time so we can continue.
Well, that's what he's doing, it looks like, by bringing me on while you're still there.
All right, my friends. Hey, you guys have a great day.
See you, Larry. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So long.
How's it going, Paul?
Great.
Yeah.
Great. A lot of, in my opinion, a lot of what Larry says is true, but I notice he's very defensive of Putin. And I think that's a mistake because it keeps him from seeing the full implications. But that's just my opinion. Uh, I don't think there's any excuse for a war that's gone on this long, and we have watched provocation after provocation, and they were getting worse and worse. And of course, Trump has threatened to make them worse if we don't get an agreement.
Well, because many people believe that Putin is the only reason that we don't have a huge escalation in Ukraine, because anyone else in Russia would have, we know that Putin tries to calm down the situation. He tries to negotiate, to talk. He doesn't say that I don't care about the United States, I don't care about. He tries to, even with Europeans, he talks with them.
He doesn't do any good.
That's the reason that many people feel that they can support Putin, because Putin is the voice of reason, after all, in this huge sort of mess in Ukraine.
Well, but it doesn't do any good. You see, I still think there's a risk that Putin's approach will not de-escalate the situation, but will make the escalation stronger and more dangerous. And I think that's what's happened over the course of this war. It's the escalations from the West have always risen. You have to remember, every weapon system that we would not send, we sent. And we even attacked their strategic bombing force. And again, Putin just turned away from it and played like it didn't happen. Well, that's not a deterrent from a worse provocation.
Because he doesn't feel that is an existential threat to Russia so far. It seems that
Well,
he doesn't feel that way.
Russian war doctrine did. And as commander-in-chief, his responsibility was to respond in a very forceful way to that attack. And he got out of it by saying, well, it really wasn't a military attack. It was a terrorist act. And under the war doctrine, the terrorist act isn't included, so I don't have to do anything. So he just redefined what had happened. In fact, he denied what had happened. It's not a military attack on Russia. It was a terrorist attack. So when you show that kind of irresolution, weakness, repeatedly, you encourage more and more escalation from the other side. And that's what's happened for 4 years. In fact, it was all his efforts with the Minsk agreement that forced him eventually to intervene. If he had taken back Donbass in 2014, when they voted to come back into Russia, because it's formerly part of Russia, he refused. He took Crimea and left them out. Well, that's where the war originated. If he had said, okay, you're now part of us, who in the hell was going to go attack Russia? Instead, he got himself in a situation where he had to go attack Ukraine. Well, this is not smart. He should have said, okay, they voted just like Crimea. We took Crimea in. The same arguments apply to taking them in. That would have prevented the war. But to have a war then, NATO, US would have had to use Ukraine to attack Russia. Well, then Russia would have been under attack. Instead, he gets himself in a fix. Well, he has to go to defend Donbass. He has to attack Ukraine. Well, that's not smart.
The economy of Russia was not prepared, Paul, in 2014 to
But
go
why?
in that direction.
Why wasn't it He
because they were
said,
in the process of reducing their dependence on dollar and improving the
no,
relationship with the
no,
BRICS
he
countries.
would not recognize a threat. He refuses to take the threat seriously. And they're so used to living with a threat that they just accept it. He, he had plenty of time. Look, he's known since 2007, 2008. In 2007, at the Munich Security Conference, he said, "We don't accept American hegemony. There's no more unipolar world." So he laid down the gauntlet. So the first thing we did was organize the invasion of South Ossetia. And we trained the Georgian army, armed them, sent them in. They killed Russian peacekeepers. And he had to rush back from the Beijing Olympics and get the army and go in there. So he knew, he's known since then. They're out to get him. And he proved by his behavior in Georgia that he was not rebuilding the Soviet empire because he defeated the army and had the country in his hands. He could have said, okay, now Georgia, we put Georgia back into Russia where it belongs. And he just took the army and went home and left them alone. So I don't know how many times he has to prove he's not trying to rebuild the Soviet empire. But the whole thing has been handled so poorly. And
Paul,
we're
you
just,
said 2007 and 2008. We have to remember that BRICS was, started to work in 2009. When Putin he somehow felt that they need some sort of a new institution to
sure.
organize the whole,
Mhm.
confrontation between the East and the West, because he saw nothing coming from the West. There is no, friendship going,
You're
happening.
proving my point. You're proving my point. He's known since then. And but he's evaded the issue directly. Yeah, he created BRICS in order to have some way out of the out of the Western system. Uh, but they should have been working on that years before. It's I think there's some sort of reality, the acceptance of reality problem in the Kremlin. They just can't accept the reality that the West is out to get them. and so they're never prepared. I've never known Putin to be prepared for anything. I mean, he wasn't prepared for the invasion of South Ossetia. How could he not be? He wasn't prepared for the overthrow of the government in Ukraine in 2014. How could he not be? He was at the Olympics, the Sochi Olympics. It was more
Paul,
important. It was more important what was going on in the Sochi Olympics. We're showing that
because
we're,
they were dealing with the chaos that CIA created in Russia, in Chechnya. They were dealing with that problem during those years.
well,
It wasn't that
he
easy for Russia
that should
to.
have told him way back then. That's even longer he should have known. And the fact that he's so unprepared that he had to enter into Donbass with 150,000 soldiers, a large percentage of which were the Wagner group, who aren't even directly part of the Russian army at that time. And the Ukrainian has an army of 600,000, 800,000. And he's goes in with 150. He was totally unprepared. And so either they have excessive hopes that negotiation works, and they've had it now for 20 years. It doesn't work. And this really doesn't make any sense to me. And
Paul,
the
they were
longer this
fighting.
the longer this goes on, the now you could say, okay, he's really very Machiavellian, and he's using this to break up NATO and break NATO away from Washington, uh, because they won't be able to come together, and NATO is not supporting Trump's peace deal, and uh, so what I'm really doing here is I'm just outsmarting them because I'm going to break up the Western Alliance. This is going to break up the Western Alliance because the Americans want peace, the Europeans won't give it. You could make that argument that he's just smarter than me. He sees beyond, and he's gonna play this in a way that breaks up the Western Alliance. Then he didn't have to worry about NATO being on his borders.
Oh, Paul, let's see the bigger picture. Assume Putin coming to power in 2000, in the year 2000, and with all the difficulties, coming from the Yeltsin and his government, Russia was totally destroyed when he came to power.
Yeah,
Internally at war with Chechnya. 10 years, during 10 years, he was trying to put an end to the conflict, the internal conflict in Russia with Chechnya, which was created by CIA. You
right.
can imagine how the economy was so weak during those years. And they cannot, right after putting an end to the conflict with Chechnya, they face the new conflict in Ukraine. How can we imagine that the economy was the economy was not prepared for that? In
I
2014
I
was
don't agree
too
with that.
soon for Russia to get involved in a new conflict in Ukraine.
Well, I they got involved in a war in Georgia, and they did
Georgia was
fine.
totally different. Georgia is a smaller country. The size of the army is not even comparable to
It
what
was an
they had
American.
in
It was an
Ukraine.
American trained and equipped army, and they went in under our direction. Um, so I don't accept that argument. Look what Stalin did. I mean, he was faced with an invasion across a 1,000-mile front, and everything was collapsing. They were pushed back to Stalingrad, to Moscow. It didn't stop him from producing an army that defeated the Wehrmacht. So I don't accept that. I don't accept that argument. Everybody is so busy apologizing for Putin, they don't see the risk in his policy. And the policy has shown us the risk over and over. And I think that it's totally possible to be defensive of Putin and to understand he's the one trying to do the right thing, not the West, but still to be realistic about the risk in his approach. And that's all I'm trying to do is just introduce a little realism that that this approach of his is risky. It could have spun out of control all along the way. And I'm still convinced if it continues, they're going to have another 4 years of this. It's going to spin out of control. And of
Paul,
course,
Paul,
yeah.
I've never been to Russia. I don't know what's going on there. What is the public opinion about what's going on? But in my opinion, the priorities for the Russian government, for Vladimir Putin, is the economy of Russia first, then the war in Ukraine. You know, he cares a lot about the casualties on the part of Russians as well. But in my opinion, the first priority is the economy. Putting all these together, it seems to me that Russia during the war in Ukraine, you've mentioned in 120,000 soldiers in Ukraine, 2022, April 2022, because as Larry mentioned, he was trying to put pressure on the West. He didn't get it. He said, let's go to hell. I remember he said, let's go to hell with the West. I'm going to do it. And he But after all, even today, the priority of Russia is the economy of Russia, more important than anything else, because that can bring some sort of chaos, discontent in Russia within the society. If the society is not happy with the economy, that could, that could be a huge
Nima,
problem for the
just a
government.
minute. Look, the trouble with the Russian economy is Putin. He defends that central bank director, that utterly stupid woman that allowed the West to take $300 billion of Russian foreign reserves. The stupid woman that keeps the interest rate 16, 17%, squashing the economy. Everybody in Russia is complaining about that woman, and he defends her. So she's the one hurting the Russian economy. You tell me what economy is going to function with 16, 17% interest rates? The return on investment can't cover the loan. And she's his person. She's been under attack all these years. She's still there. If the Russian economy is suffering, it's from the central bank policies, and it's from the dilatory, slow exclusion of or removal of Russia from the West. It took them so long. And of course, what do we know about that woman? She is pro-American, trained by American neoliberal economists, and she's Atlanticist integrationist. She wants Russia part of the West. So she gives Russia to the West. Look, here's Russia about to make one of Putin's many mistakes. Instead of having taken Donbass so that the Ukrainians would have to invade Russia, he's about to invade Russia, and the central bank director doesn't have enough sense to get Russia's assets out of the hands where they can be frozen and now confiscated. She didn't have enough sense to pull those assets back and put them somewhere safe. No. Well, if you got a central bank director that incompetent, how are you going to have an economy? So once again, when I make these criticisms, I don't mean them as a personal attack on Putin. I just mean there are places where there have been fundamental mistakes made, or so it seems to me, and that we can't let defensiveness of Putin keep us from seeing it. The whole time I've always said he's the best leader the world has. He's a humane person. He's trying to avoid nuclear war. That's true. He has humanity in him. He's not a Netanyahu, or like any of the American neoconservatives. He's not that kind of person. He's humane, and I'm all for him. But I can still see or think I see, I may be wrong, but it looks to me like he's created a bigger problem by not being decisive. And that it was the lack of decisiveness is the reason, as Larry Johnson was saying, so many American generals said, oh, we can beat Russia. They're losing, Ukraine's winning. It was because they didn't see any decisive action. No one, I don't think anyone thought Ukraine can withstand 4 years of conflict with Russia. I just want to remind you again, Stalin the Red Army in 2 years destroyed the Wehrmacht and freed up thousands of miles of Russia from Germans and Eastern Europe. From Stalingrad to Berlin was half the time Putin has spent in Donbass. That's inexcusable.
But it's not, in my opinion, Putin sees Ukraine as the same case for the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan. He saw it, if he goes to the western part of Ukraine, it's going to turn into a new Afghanistan for Russia. That's why he didn't go that far.
No chance of that.
These people hate Russians, Paul. Yeah, we know
No,
that.
no, wait. We can't say they hate Russians and that they're part of Russia and all in America. I think what's happened to Ukraine is that,
I'm talking about the leadership, not talking about the people in Ukraine, mostly the people.
well, you
but
see,
the leadership.
he's taken no action against the leaders. The Israelis would have executed every one of them the first day of the conflict. The conflict would have been over. If the Israelis had been in there, Ukraine would have been defeated in 24 hours. The whole thing would have been over. They would have killed everybody in the government. The missile would have come right in the window and landed in their lap. Look at what they've done to the Iranians, to Hezbollah, to Hamas. He's never
What are the
gone
achievements,
after the
Paul? After
government.
all,
He's
what are
never
the
tried to
achievements for
shut.
Israel?
Huh?
What are the achievements for Israel in the Middle East? Did you
Well,
see
they've
the lines,
eliminated.
the
They've
thousands of
elim.
people in
They
line at the Portuguese embassy?
they have used us and their own nefarious ways to eliminate their enemies. The Arab states are gone. The Arab states are gone. There's no Arab state left but Saudi Arabia.
But there were no Arab states. They are all under the thumb of the United States. I don't see any Arab state, any Persian
Well,
Gulf state.
they weren't. Syria wasn't. Russia had its naval base in Syria. That's why Russia went in with the Air Force to stop our invasion. Iraq, no, they weren't. These were independent states. Iraq, Syria, Libya. They're gone. There's no state there. And what Arab state we have?
Who's
We got
telling you,
Jordan,
Paul,
which
today?
is what?
Who says that Israel today is the winner of what's going on in the Middle East? No one says that, because Israel is economically is losing, militarily is losing, geopolitically is losing, but Russia is winning in all those areas in Ukraine.
Well, again, it's really not that kind of question, is it? And I don't know that Israel's losing. They've expanded into Syria, now southern Syria.
I'm
They
asking
say,
you, do you see Russians in line, to at a foreign embassy to get out of Russia today? I see Russians getting back to Russia. I don't see Russians are, somehow they want to get out of Russia because of the war. But you see that in Israel today. People, thousands of people in line at the Portuguese embassy for citizenship appointment.
well, so what? But they're still winning.
So
It
winning
may,
what?
it, you know, there's so many other explanations, Nima. For example, the Netanyahu government is extremely oppressive. And so for the Israelis who are opposed to the policies, of which there are a number, they even have a newspaper, Haaretz. I don't know if they've tamed Haaretz or not, but they probably feel personally threatened. When is Netanyahu going to pick them up? There used to be Israeli organizations for the protection of the West Bank. It will call something like the organization for the prevention of destruction of Palestinian housing. I knew them. I had one of them for a house guest some years ago, and I've never heard from them from years. They've disappeared. I don't know whether they've been shot or put in jail or. But I would imagine a lot of people who, I mean, not all Israelis are devoid of a moral conscience. Some of them, some of them don't like what's happening. Others don't like the corruption associated with Netanyahu. You know, he's under indictment in his own country, not just from the International Criminal Court, but he's under indictment from the Israeli Department of Justice or whatever they call it. And so there's corruption, there's cronyism. He's gotten increasingly authoritative. His government justifies genocide, justifies the total destruction of Palestinians. Well, people who don't go along with that probably want to get out. I mean, in many ways, it's kind of like people getting out of Nazi Germany. They just had a bad sense of feeling what's going to happen. So I wouldn't see that as a defeat for Israel. I don't think Israel can be defeated until the United States abandons it. And then it won't be the Arabs, it'll be Iran. Then the Iranian, you know as well as anybody, the Iranians aren't Arabs. And I don't know how we got into this discussion, I guess, from talking to Larry. But I still am nervous about it because clearly the West isn't interested in this agreement. I don't think, and I don't know what about the national leaders of the European countries, but the EU, those leaders don't want to give the war up because it's what's holding the EU together. And it also has the prospects of money from the weapons production and developments and rearmaments. So the EU leaders probably see the prospect of a future war with Russia as a way to get some kind of spending going that helps the economy. If German consumer industry is shut down by sanctions and energy shortages and so on, well, they can get all around that if they're making weapons. So they probably see the war as economically valuable because they're sinking away into economic nothing. And they see it as politically valuable because, well, we have this common enemy, we have to stand together. If they give up the enemy, they've lost the economic impact, they've lost the political impact. So I don't know why Putin thinks they would give it up. What do they gain? What do they gain from a peace agreement? If they were shaking in their boots from fear of Russians coming in, taking Europe, then they would be interested in a peace agreement. But as they have no fear of the Russians whatsoever, they've got nothing to gain. They're asked to give up the enemy that holds them together and that has some prospect for employment and economic growth in the weapons area. And so, and what does it mean to Trump? He can't really say he's a peace president because he gets a solution to the Ukraine when he's blowing up ships off Ukraine coast and closing their airspace and threatening an invasion.
Venezuela. You mean Venezuela?
Venezuela, yeah, Venezuela. What did I say?
You said Ukraine. No.
Oh, yeah, no,
That's
Venezuela.
because we were talking about Ukraine. You just
Yeah, so he's going to eliminate Maduro in Venezuela, but he's the peace president, and it's what does he gain? I don't know. He can claim another victory, but Europe ain't going to see it as a victory. I mean, just think about it. What does Europe have to gain from the peace deal? Can you think of anything? No, I can't. I can't either. And so again, it comes back to Putin. How come he structured it such they got nothing to gain? So how's he going to get a deal? He should have them quaking in their boots so they want a deal. Instead, he and Lavrov every week say, we want a deal, we want a deal, we want a deal, we want a deal. Well, that's not, Europe looks at them and says, well, I can't even beat the Ukrainians. So it doesn't work. I don't think what Putin's doing works because, first of all, I don't think there's any goodwill in the West. I don't think goodwill is any longer an effective diplomatic tool. I don't think it exists in the West or in Europe, anywhere in the West. There's no goodwill. There's a hardened self-interest. They'll sacrifice everything for this self-interest and money, basically. So you can see why I can get impatient with some of the analysts. All of these things stay out of their picture, and it's not our job to defend Putin. It's our job to analyze what the hell's going on that could cause it to blow up even worse. And
actually, I don't see it as defending Putin. I see it as a country has priorities. I see Putin managing, balancing these priorities in Russia. That's why I think that it makes sense to me, after all, when I look at the behavior.
His priority, he says over and over, is to protect and defend Russian national sovereignty.
But not at the cost of sacrificing everything.
At the cost of sacrificing everything. Russian sovereignty. The Russian people. He emphasizes this over and over. This is why they're supportive of the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Christian Church, why they're supportive of family, why they're not supportive of all the woke elements in the West, transgenderism and all of the rest. They're trying to maintain social stability. They're trying to get the birth rate up. They give rewards to families that have children and stay together. It's a totally different thing from the West. And he emphasizes that that's his goal is to protect the existence of the Russian people. And so the economy, what does he achieve if he somehow saves an economy by selling people out to the West? I mean, really, he doesn't achieve anything that he wants to achieve. So I don't think he knows anything about the economy. If he did, he wouldn't have that central bank director that he has. There's so many people are critical of her in Russia, important people. I don't even know who her supporters are. And maybe I'm too hard on her because I think she basically is a product of the American neoliberals, and that's probably all she knows. But for some reason, she's got Putin's protection, and I couldn't say why or what. And so anyhow, that's
Yeah. Yeah, it was a great discussion today, Paul. It was amazing. I think your your points of view are so important because our audience needs to hear both sides of the aisle. We are not talking to agree with whatever we are talking about. We're talking to challenge our thoughts on what's going on in Ukraine, for example.
yeah.
But it was great to have you on to talk with Larry and then, yeah, answering my questions.
Well, I
Thank you so much.
appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, I do. I appreciate the opportunity, and I don't think anybody right now knows what's going to happen about the peace. It's the same people, and they've been saying the same thing for a long time, but nothing ever happens.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing. And Trump puts out 28 points. Now, you may remember I wrote about that. I said it's very promising, and then it's almost the next day. It's only 19 points. Europe objected. So, isn't that right? He cut it down to 19 points, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well,
Then
so
he said
what?
22 points, and every time he
So
comes
what?
in.
Yeah. Well, 1/3 of the proposal disappears before the Russians ever get it.
Yeah,
So, how do they know the 19 points aren't going to disappear?
yeah,
It's not, it's like a circus. It's not,
exactly. Exactly that.
and of course, Lavrov said that.
Yeah, he
See, I
said,
think he's finally waking up. He's another gentleman from the past. They remind me of 19th century British ministers. you know, uh, so we'll see and hope for the best, but it's hard to see where the hope is.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Thank you so much, Paul. Great pleasure as always.
Well, thank you, Nima. Thank you. I look forward to doing this as long as anyone's interested.
Exactly. See you next week, Paul.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And send me the URL.
Sure.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Goodbye, my friend.
Goodbye.